Episode 4 of 8. The Healing Word, Trauma, Attachment, and the Psychology of Divine Preparation. The Bible is not merely a theological document. It is not merely a historical record. It is not merely a literary masterpiece. It is, in the deepest sense of that word, a living word, a word that speaks not only to the intellect and not only to the spirit but to the whole human person, including the psychological interior, the emotional architecture, the neural pathways through which human beings process experience and construct meaning. The God who created human consciousness did not overlook it in the process of revelation. He speaks directly into it, with a precision and a tenderness that modern psychology is only beginning to have the language to describe. Nowhere in Scripture is this psychological precision more evident than in the structural placement of Genesis 22 verses 20 through 24. To understand why this passage is here, in this exact location, immediately after the Accada, we need to understand what the Accada would have done to a human nervous system. Abraham had been commanded by God to take his son, his only son, the son he loved, Isaac, and to offer him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that God would show him. Modern trauma research, building on the foundational work of Peter Levine, Bessel van der Kolk, Stephen Porges, and the broader field of somatic and developmental trauma psychology, has established with considerable scientific rigor what happens to a human being who faces the anticipated loss of the most cherished person in their life. The nervous system moves into what Porges calls the dorsal vagal state of freeze and collapse when the threat is too overwhelming for fight or flight to address. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of executive function and rational processing, is flooded by stress hormones and effectively goes offline. The hippocampus, which is responsible for the proper encoding and sequencing of memories, is disrupted, so that the traumatic experience is stored not as a coherent narrative with a beginning, middle, and end but as fragments, as sensory impressions, as emotional charges that can be triggered by stimuli that seem unrelated to the original event. Abraham would have carried the sensory memory of that mountain. The weight of the wood on Isaac's shoulders. The voice of the boy asking, "Where is the lamb?" The act of binding his son. The lifting of the knife. These are the kinds of traumatic imprints that do not resolve simply because the immediate threat resolves. The angel intervenes. The ram is provided. The covenant is renewed. But the neural traces of what was experienced on that mountain do not simply disappear. They remain in the body, in the nervous system, as what trauma researchers call unprocessed traumatic material. Into this psychological reality, the text of Genesis 22 verse 20 delivers the most precisely calibrated therapeutic intervention imaginable. And it was told to Abraham, saying, "Behold, Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor." The form of the intervention is not dramatic. It is not visionary. It is not another theophany or divine encounter. It is something much gentler and in many ways much more effective for its purpose. It is ordinary family news. It is the kind of communication that in every human culture serves as a re-anchoring mechanism, a signal that the ordinary world continues, that the social fabric is intact, that life is going on, that the threat which seemed total was not in fact total. John Bowlby, the British psychiatrist who developed attachment theory in the mid-20th century, described the fundamental human need for what he called a secure base, a reliable and consistently present relationship from which the individual can venture out into the world and to which they can return when threatened. His research, and the subsequent work of Mary Ainsworth, Mary Main, and a generation of developmental psychologists who built on his foundations, established that the quality of early attachment relationships shapes the nervous system, the emotional regulatory capacity, and the relational patterns of human beings across their entire lifespan. Abraham's calling had required him to leave his secure base. He had left his father's house, his kindred, his homeland. He had separated himself from the extended family network that in the ancient world provided the primary experience of secure attachment. The Accader then confronted him with the ultimate threat to his sole remaining attachment, his son Isaac. And now, in the immediate aftermath of that confrontation, God delivers a message that restores the sense of a wider relational context. The family continues. The network is intact. Connections exist in the broader world. The secure base has not been destroyed. It has simply been relocated to Aram, and news of it has arrived at precisely the right moment. Dan Allender, the Christian psychologist and theologian who has written with extraordinary insight about the intersection of narrative theology and trauma recovery, speaks of what he calls the redemptive story, the capacity of the human soul to find within the larger narrative of God a framework that is big enough to hold the darkest chapters of personal history without being overwhelmed by them. The key to trauma healing, in Allender's framework, is not the erasure of the difficult chapters but the integration of those chapters into a larger story that gives them meaning and situates them within a movement that is going somewhere, a movement that has a purpose and a destination. Genesis 22 verses 20 through 24 performs exactly this function for Abraham. The traumatic chapter of the Accader is not erased. It is not minimized or denied. But it's situated within a larger story that continues past it, a story in which covenant fruitfulness is still happening in distant places, in which the family of faith is still growing, in which the divine purpose that required the sacrifice is also the divine purpose that has already arranged the provision. The genealogy is, in the deepest sense of the term, narrative therapy. For the individual carrying the wounds of the family of origin, this passage offers a particularly powerful healing word. Many who listen to this teaching carry wounds that were inflicted not on a mountain but in a home, not through an extraordinary test of faith but through the ordinary ongoing failures of human families to provide the consistent, attuned, responsive care that children need for their full flourishing. The theory of attachment tells us that insecure early attachment creates relational templates, internal working models of relationship, that shape how we experience ourselves and others across the entire lifespan. The anxiously attached person constantly fears abandonment and seeks reassurance in ways that paradoxically often drive away the very closeness they are seeking. The avoidantly attached person has learned to suppress attachment needs and present a facade of independence while inwardly maintaining a hunger for connection that they dare not acknowledge. The disorganized or fearfully attached person experiences intimate relationships as simultaneously desired and terrifying, because the people who were supposed to be safe were also the source of threat. These attachment wounds are real. They shape neural architecture. They influence every close relationship. And they cannot be simply dissolved by intellectual assent to theological propositions, however true those propositions may be. Healing of attachment wounds requires what the trauma researchers call a new relational experience, an encounter with a caregiver whose consistency, attunement, responsiveness, and reliability gradually rewires the nervous system's relational templates from insecurity toward security. The theological truth of Genesis 22 verses 20 through 24 speaks directly into these wounds, and it speaks not merely intellectually but through the structure of the narrative itself. Here is what the structure is saying to the anxiously attached soul. You have been afraid that the test means you are about to be abandoned, that the silence of God means rejection, that the difficulty of the season means you are not loved. But look, in the middle of the test, before you even descend the mountain, the preparation for your next provision is already complete. God does not test and then abandon. God tests and simultaneously provides. He does not leave you in the silence of Moriah. He sends the report of Rebekah. He is consistently, reliably, constantly working on your behalf even when you cannot see it. And to the avoidantly attached soul, who has learned that depending on others leads only to disappointment and that the safest strategy is self-sufficiency, the text says this: the provision that is coming for you cannot be manufactured by your own resources. You cannot produce Rebekah by your own effort. You cannot negotiate your way to your divine appointment. It comes as a gift, announced in the passive voice, Vayugad, it was told to Abraham, because the divine economy runs on receptivity as much as it runs on initiative. The person you most need to become in order to walk into your divine appointment is not more competent or more self-sufficient. It is more open, more receptive, more willing to hear the announcement that arrives from outside yourself. James Wilder, working in the field of what he calls life model, and Curt Thompson, whose book The Soul of Shame draws together neuroscience and theology in a profoundly illuminating way, both point toward the same healing principle. The brain is changed not primarily by information but by relationship. Shame, which is the core wound of the fallen human condition, the sense that I am fundamentally flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging, is not healed by argument. It is healed by encounter with a relational presence that communicates, you are seen, you are known, and you are valued. This is precisely what the genealogy of Genesis 22 does for Abraham, and through Abraham for every soul that receives this word into their deep interior. You are seen. Before the need was voiced, God saw it. You are known. Your name, like the names of Milcah's sons, is known to God individually, specifically, with the care of a parent who knows each child's particular character and calling. And you are valued. The entire architecture of divine preparation, the formation of Rebekah in the house of Bethuel across years that Abraham knew nothing of, is evidence of the value that God places on the human souls He has chosen for His purposes. He does not improvise your provision at the last minute. He prepares it with the same meticulous care that a master craftsman puts into a work that will last for generations. Receive this word as medicine for the deepest chamber of your heart today. After your Moriah, God is sending the report of Rebekah. After your test, the provision is already complete. After your silence, the announcement is already on its way. You are not abandoned. You are not overlooked. You are not forgotten. You are being prepared, and your provision is being prepared, and the timing is in the hands of the God who has never once been late. If this psychological and theological healing word has spoken to you today, subscribe, like, and share this teaching. Reach us at christ4life143@gmail.com. Stay tuned for the next video. Join us next time as we continue verse by verse.